So hello everyone, welcome to today's session on React anti-patterns. In this talk, Shubhendu will explain us about what we should not be doing in React, and I think it is very necessary when we code on front-end side to improve the performance of the web app. So over to you, Shubhendu. We can start.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm Suvendra Kumar Sao. I'm working as senior software developer in Talentica software from the past 4 years. So today we are going to take a session on the anti-pattern in React.js. So everyone knows that in the market there are a lot many libraries and framework out there. Earlier we used to means basically we use jQuery earlier. Slowly we the front-end frameworks and libraries gradually progressed, and eventually right now if we see we have top three contender, including Angular, Vue, and React. To be specific, Angular and Vue are the frameworks in which we have everything into it, and however the React hold the Vue part of the MVC framework. So it is not exactly a framework; it is a library, to be precise. So because of which it is extremely lightweight, because it doesn't have any uh, much functionality into it. If anyone requires it, they can get it from external library, which integrate extremely well with the React. Okay, so and the reason behind it, that is that it is an open source and it has a massive community support. Okay, and if you see from the graph itself that was being projected on your screen, if you see the React.js npm download is far ahead of the AngularJS and Vue.js, and this clearly shows like how massive support it can have in the open source networks. So because of that, and in recent years it has gained a lot of popularity because of that specific reason. So apart from that, when we say extremely fast, so basically it's the virtual DOM that is present, the mechanism with which the React.js operate is making it extremely fast, and it's used a algorithm which is known as heuristic algorithm. It's operate on a linear space, uh, a time space. So so this is how the React has popularity over the years, and this is how it stand against its competitive frameworks as well as library. And I didn't compare it with jQuery because I think the time of jQuery is almost over. So it's needless to say about that. So okay, that's how we understand why even we use React.js, and why even we are discussing React.js. So the next question is that so when we say the React.js is so extremely
Shubhendu,
fast
one more,
and it is so,
just one
yeah.
more thing. Everyone, please, if you guys have any doubt or you want to add more to Shubhendu, please feel free to add your comment in the chat window. We'll monitor the chat window and reply for your comments.
So when we says that React.js is so popular, it has so wide support in the market because of open source, and when it is so much performant, then why even we are concerned about the anti-pattern? See, anti-pattern is something that doesn't comes with framework or any library. The anti-pattern generally arises out of the developer's wrong uses of the framework or the library. So React just doesn't has means theoretically speaking means there is no such thing called as anti-pattern. It's basically the wrong uses that adapted by the developer without understanding the beneath concept upon which the frameworks or library works. That is the reason why we are concerned about the React.js anti-pattern. Now, as Uncle Ben has told us, okay, and it might be surprising who is Uncle Ben. Basically, I'm Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. So, with great power comes the great responsibility. So, this is why we should means the power we get with the React.js flexibility, open sourceness, and performance. We should handle the React.js code in a great responsible way. Okay, so this is why we should be concerned about the anti-pattern in React.js. Okay, and moving to the next, the important part of the this discussion, uh, that we are means if we go through the anti-pattern structures, there are enormous anti-pattern that can be formed in ReactJs itself. Okay, so it is very means obvious that there is no set of anti-pattern. We can say okay, there are 5 or 10 or 20. We cannot give any count to the anti-pattern. So what I'm going to today discuss with you, I'm going to discuss the top 5 which I feel I personally worked upon in 3 different projects and with multiple developers. And this is what the common anti-pattern that I have observed across all these projects in these years. Okay, so I will be covering the 5 anti-pattern and subsequently I will tell you the theoretical aspects. Okay, why it is affecting the performance and how we are going to overcome that. Okay, so this is very extremely common and every developer must have used the index at some point during learning or later on to refer as a key attribute while using the map. Okay, so if someone is using map to render the DOM element in the screen, and if he doesn't use that key attribute, then the React starts showing giving you warning messages that uh, you have to use the key. So basically, React gives us warning because React, if everyone knows that React works on the principle of virtual DOM. Okay, so basically, React keeps an entire copy of the existing DOM as a copy, and whenever we change something on the screen, he compares the virtual DOM with the actual DOM, and whatever the difference it finds, it will insert into the DOM. So when we have a static DOM like a div element or any element as a static element, in that case React able to keep it as it is in the virtual DOM. So anything changes in that part, React will be able to identify it easily. However, whenever we are generating the DOM on the fly using map specifically, then React doesn't have any knowledge while it's getting mounted in the virtual DOM, because it is always recalculated on the fly, right? Like suppose we have 5 element in the map in an array, and we are generating the 5 list of 5, then it will be dynamically generated on the fly. So when we see the error in the console that React is keep on asking for keys, then the first thing most of the developer I have seen doing is like pushing the index into the key attribute. Okay, so if why not we should use the index, because the index is a unique element, right? It will start from 0 and it will go on. But the reason actually we should not use the key as index, because the index is generated on the runtime. Like while the map is being generated, it is being generated. So it doesn't depend upon the data. It's depend upon the order of the data, right? And if we do any such operation in which the order of the data is getting affected, in that case the index will change for each data. So when React will compare it with a virtual DOM, then suddenly what will happen, uh, React will understand that so many DOM element has been modified, and React will try to repicture the entire DOM element again and again. So that will is a heavy process. Although React is so fast, we cannot notice these differences with our naked eyes. Okay, but it's going to affect in a long term. Means when the project keeps on growing and a lot of actions are doing, simply millisecond keeps on adding to a project, and it's going to hamper in the long term. So what is the best solution? Uh, when I say the best solution, this is the solution that can be used ready-madely in your code. It is applicable for both functional as well as class-based component. To generate the unique ID, if the data doesn't have any unique field, then it's better to have a unique ID in the data itself. Okay, so you have to generate your own data, a unique ID in the data before using it, right? For that, there are a lot many libraries are there. Either you can write your own custom ID generator, or you can use something like EUUID library, which is easily available in npm. And the data should supposed to be looks something similar to the example given over here. So if you see, like every ID has to be unique. Okay, so let's go to the practical aspect, like how it's going to affect. Okay, so let's say this is the what we have for the key factors, the first loop that you are seeing on the left side, that is being generated with the index as the field, and the right side is being generated in which the data has the ID itself. This ID is included in the data. So right now what's our target is, we want to insert some new data at the index 2. So basically it will be added below this and it will be added below this. Okay. So right now what will happen when we insert the data at second index? If you see in this case, the new data we have inserted gets a new ID. All the old data still have the old IDs. That's why how the React will understand. React will say, okay, these four have the same ID, so these four are not new. I have to just insert this after at a certain point in the DOM, and React will affect only this element. However, if you see the loop in which we are using the index, in that case, we have used to have 4 id. We have inserted this new one at the second place, because of which id of these two DOM element will get changed. So if you see in this case, React will re-render all the 3 elements again. Okay, even if these two are existing earlier also, but React will not understand these things and it will try to repend these things. Okay, so in this case the 3 element is getting affected, and in this case just only new element is getting affected. So because of this, we should use the uh, either we should find the idle key field which we can use as a ID, or else we have to create a custom ID within our data itself. And here we go to the next. The next anti-pattern says that creating child element inside DOM parent. Okay, so ideally what happens is that whenever suppose while we are creating any component, we have a sometime we need to break down the component. Okay, but most of the developer understand the breaking down of component as just creating a separate block for writing the element, so that it will not get clutter over that. But the actual problem is not that. So what if you go properly through the React documentation, the React document itself suggests that you should never create any component inside the existing component. Okay, uh, so uh, so the reason behind is that whenever the React start building the virtual DOM, if you are creating one if you are creating the child component inside the parent component, in that case React will treat the entire thing as a single DOM element, and it will keeps a single copy of that. So sometime what will happen, sometime the parent in parent itself, the state will get changed, or any props will get changed, which should not affect the children. But in this case, since it is entirely in the single DOM element, so the child will also get re-renders unnecessarily. Okay, and that will affect unnecessary rendering is going to affect the entire entire virtual DOM and the performance of the React. So if we try to understand what is the best solution for this, in functional component we can use the memo that is given out of the box from the React itself. And in case of class-based component, we should use should component update. Okay, that is the lifecycle hook, should component update. Inside that, we should check and try to control the when the component should update or when should not update. And along with that, we also should create a new file for this particular reason. Either new file, or you can write the same code also outside the block of class or function. So right now what you are saying, so this is what the anti-pattern 2 says. Basically what we have done is that we have created one parent component inside which we have 4 children component. Okay, internal children with memo, external children with memo. I will explain what all this means. Internal children is nothing but the component that we have written inside the parent component itself. The second component, this one, is nothing but it's the same component. It's the children component which is written inside the parent component, but as we have discussed in the PPT, here we are using the memo. Okay, and in next case, the external children, here we have created a new file and placed our children over there. And in this case, external children in memo, we have created a new external children enclosed within a memo function, as we have discussed in PPT. Okay, so right now what we have done is that we have appended a increase counter. It will on click of this, our count in the parent component is going to change. Okay, so if you are seeing the console part, here you are seeing like all the five component are being loaded: the parent component, children, internal children with memo, external children, and external children with memo. So now what we are going to observe, whenever we are changing the state in the parent, only parent component, which all component, children component are going to be affected. Okay, so in this case let's do that. Okay, here I just updated the count in the parent state. If you see, the parent component get re-rendered, that is fine. Internal children loaded, means internal children also means re-rendered. That is a fair enough expectation, because this is a wrong way of loading, as we know. What if we try to use the memo solution inside the internal children? It is still loading. So even if we use children, means a component inside a parent component, still the memo is not going to help you out, because in this case the React still treated the entire children as the part of parent component itself. Now coming to the external children, we have created a separate file, but we haven't used the memo, right? So in this case also the React will be not be concerned. It will treat okay, whenever the parent is going to change, I will change the internal, because we have just placed the code in the separate file, but we haven't used this as such. Okay, and however, whenever we are using the external file or external children along with the memo, this is the only component that doesn't get re-render when the parent get re-rendered. Okay, so this is one of the correct way of using. These three processes are entirely wrong. Okay, and one more thing that I want to mention, like apart from this method, component should update, I think there is one more method which is uh, using the pure component while creating class-based component. Okay, so that we can use.
Shubhendu, can you also show the code base for this one? Maybe that will be more clear
Yeah,
how people should
yeah, sure.
create separate file and
So,
what do you mean by inside the same
uh,
parent component, right?
yeah. So this is how it has been implemented. Okay, so this is the parent component rendering. Okay, uh, this is parent component is getting loaded code inside code. The first internal children that we have observed in the code over here, internal children, is this block. Okay, so this is the parent component, and here we have the internal children. Here we are using the same internal children but enclosing with the memo, because we learn from our solution that memo is the solution for this. So we have created two children, and apart from that we have created two more children. This is external children without memo, and another children with memo. Okay, so this is how we have created the four children, and how we are using, just simply mounting the children's internal children with memo, external children with memo. And on click of increase counter state, we are simply modifying the state, because of which this supposed to run as expected, because this is a parent component, and along with that it is also rendering child component with memo, and external children without memo. So these three are being rendered again and again unnecessarily, while uh, by changing the state we are not touching the functionality of these children, right? Then there is no necessity of changing these things, this children component. However, when we enclose this entire thing with a memo, this is the syntax out of the box from the React.
We have one comment like it should not be anti-pattern, depends on the scenario to use memo or not. It might be ki we want to render the children, right, based on the property change. In that case,
Mhm.
should we use memo or not? Because the memo is not going to re-render the children.
So whenever someone has to use any component where there is no dependency on the parent, then they have to go with this flow. It is not that every time you have to go with memo flow only.
Okay.
So this is the use case, like when we have to change the parent state without affecting the children, then only we should go with the memo. Because while coding we don't really focus what is the exact use case of this. Okay, because tomorrow it might be happen that some dependency will come from the parent on this component, and the flow design has to be changed. This design is only true when parent component changes should not affect the children. This is the only use case. So the next point is that handling value from the input field. Okay. So actually what happened is that there is a most of the time we deal with the means the way to get the data from the input field in React itself. Okay. So usually in most of this time, people uses on change, on blur, some like inbuilt functionality from JavaScript that is combined with React, those things, or else alternatively they use ref. Okay. So I will show you, demonstrate you how this has impact on your code. Okay. And in my preference, like what is the ideal way is that using the native JavaScript way to access those things. Okay. Again, before you say this depend upon situation, I agree. This depend upon the situation how you are going to handle the thing. But I will go with a particular use case. Okay. And this is true in most of the cases. Okay. Let me demonstrate you that first. Okay, so here we have three input field. One is going to change whenever we write. One is going to change whenever means basically the problem statement is that when we press the show button, then only we should get the rendered value, input value. Okay, but however, in the first case in which we have appended with the on change. Okay, let's say I'm typing out the my name. Okay, so right now my component has the entire value of my name. Okay, but it is not showing until I show. Okay, so once I pressed, it started showing. That is fine. Okay, but if you observe, every time I write each character. Okay, so in this way, every time it is low, re-rendering the re-rendering the entire component, which is really unnecessary because I want the value on click of show button. Okay. Similarly, there is another way that is given by React use ref. Okay, here if we keep on typing, you will see uh, it's not rendering again and again. Okay, that's how we solved our first problem. Okay, it's not rendering unnecessarily because we want the value only when we press the show button. Here also, when we press the show button, it is still showing. However, even React also recommend try to use useref as limited as you can. Okay, the reason behind is that whenever we use the useref, it keep the entire component in the state itself. Okay, here we are just concerned about the value in the input box, but if we see whatever it's storing, it is storing a lot of data. Okay, if you see on my console, there are a lot of data that are being stored over here. That is the reason, right? Means this is preventing the re-rendering of the screen. However, it is not that much efficient because it is storing lot of data in the memory heap itself. Okay, so the other element that I will suggest is like even if we are using ReactJs, ReactJs is nothing but built out of the JavaScript language itself. So why not we should go with the default one like document get element by ID that we use right from the JavaScript time. Okay. So here if we write down my name, it's still and click on the show button, it will still show. Okay. Here this data is not being stored anywhere in the document. Okay. So whenever we click, we get the value on the real time and being and showing it over here. And the reason why I have demonstrated this, okay, is that in most of the use cases we have a form. In form itself, we have lot of field to enter. Okay, let's say first name, last name, middle name, age, and so on and so on. And most of the time we use those data only when press the submit button or something like that. Okay, but I have seen like being the developer's favorite is this on change. Okay, every time we change, they keep storing it in the state again and again. And useref is hardly used by anyone because it is clearly mentioned in the React document that it should be limitedly used, so developers are good with that. So this is how the difference is that. Okay, so another way, even if we are on changing and we don't want to this do is by introducing the introducing a jump time like every 2 seconds we will notify if the change has to be, if any keystroke has been done or not. Okay, so that is another way of handling this. But this plain JavaScript way of handling is far better in term of re-rendering, in term of storage, because the first input box has a problem with re-rendering, multiple re-rendering, and the second input box we have solved that problem, but it has with storage. The storage is slightly ahead of means it's little heavy in the memory heavy.
Even though we have a question here,
So yeah.
so the question is like if you want to run some validation, right? So when somebody is typing something and you want
Mhm.
to run some validation, in that case,
Yeah.
get element ID might not work, right? We have to do via the on chains whenever there is something typing, and we have to do the validation on the dynamic time.
Yeah, but actually I have a counter question. Even if we want to do validation, it's purely depend upon us. Okay. For example, suppose let's say this is a input field with I have to enter my name. Okay, and you will put validation. Okay, user should enter more than three value, then only he should be allowed. Okay, so user cannot come and directly enter the three element directly, right? User will go one by one, S, U, B, and so on. So even if we don't require these checks again and again, okay, so we keep on checking every time. Okay, practically it is basically how you want to validate. Okay, if you want to validate on the fly, then you have to put this. Okay, but you just imagine at one time, every time you render this, if every time the user type, you will run a heavy function calculating a what is the length of the string, and again when user type second character, again you will check for the same. Okay, so basically you are checking every time user hit the keyboard, right? So this is wrong way. So in this case you can use the unblur. Okay, but unblur also has its own like for example you can check only when the user come out of the this screen. You can use that validation. Okay, you can counter me with that. But the problem with the unblur is that suppose we have to do operation only on click of the button. Okay, uh, so in that case you cannot put unblur, right? Because suppose I have to enter, and on click of this show button, it will call an API. Okay, so in this case if I, let's say, I type this out, and I will, instead of clicking this, I will click anywhere outside. So on blur, it will be automatically saved, and the API will get triggered. Okay.
So
So everything has a caveat, and what you ask is really true. Validation, if you want to do that on the fly, then you can have to go with on-chain. There is no other way. But I am showing a use case where you have to get the value of the input box only on click of particular button.
so that's so
This is the use
what you're
case.
trying to say is the wrong usage of on chains where
Where where we want the value
all
only when we
correct.
want
So
it.
in that case, it is wrong to use on chains because it is unnecessary rendering the
Re-rendering
elements.
again and
You
again,
can in
and
that case better to use get element by ID because it doesn't re-render, it doesn't load on the memory.
store
So it
anywhere
is
in the
it has
memory.
both the benefit.
Yes, both the
Particular
benefit.
case.
Okay, so if your code demands on validating on change, so you have to do that. There is no other way, right? Depend on the use case, but yeah, everything has a means sometime the performance has to be sacrificed if the use case is like that. So moving to the next anti-pattern. So when I say non-DOM manipulation inside component, actually what I mean was that from the inside the component, suppose there are multiple sub-component you have created, like parent component with two children component. Okay, even if you don't create the children component, everything inside a single component, but there are two fields. For example, this is the component. Let's say this is the entire component, parent component, in which has two field. One is profit calculator, I will call it, and another I will call it as loss calculator. Okay, so the basically it's doing nothing, but whenever I enter the amount, it will and say the calculate, it will calculate the profit and give me the result. When I ask for loss calculator and say calculate, it will calculate the loss and give it to me. Okay, so this is what I have built, and everything is inside a single component itself. Okay, so when I render it, if you see, there is a function that I have written to calculate the profit. Let me show you in the code. Yeah, this is the function that I have written to calculate the profit, and this is the function that I have written to calculate the loss. There are two functions. Okay, since we have introduced our profit and loss in the component itself, like we are calculating profit and loss on the fly. In because of that, whenever we load the component, entire component, our both the function has been called. That is absolutely fine because this is the on load we are calling these things. However, let's now enter the profit calculator. Introduce written 100 and pressed calculate. If you see, it has calculated the 100 as 10 INR. That is what we have the profit. And loss calculator we haven't touched it yet. But if you see, here two things are being called. Okay, one is calculate profit and one is calculate loss. However, if you see, we have touched the calculate profit only. So we have changed the profit, but here profit as well as loss calculation is also being triggered. And the sole reason behind is that here also we are not using the use memo inbuilt functions. Okay, so this is how the DOM manipulation means. Basically we are touching that part of the means while we are rendering the parent and we are doing certain calculation on the screen, there are certain part of the code which doesn't get affected, should not get affected, but they are getting recalculated on the fly. Okay, because of the way we have written the code. Okay, so this solution, I think since most of the people nowadays are using the function component, they are acquainted with the use memo functionality. So I think the people who use functional component doesn't do such mistake, but the people who are using the class component and whenever they do this sort of calculation inside the render function, render block, then this is the common issue which can be tackled by using the memo is one. This is one of the external library because React earlier doesn't provide any solution for this kind of problem statement. Later on, in the latest version of the React where the class component is present, there they have introduced these external libraries like memo is one and all to handle this problem statement. Okay, so here the problem is what, here we have created two functions to calculate the same, but here we are enclosing one with use memo and we are not enclosing the uh, other function with use memo. So what happen is that whenever we are calculating the profit, okay, so this is running, that is fine, but we haven't touched this thing, but still it is running. Okay, and same goes for the like the reverse way, like when we modify the loss calculator, if you see, okay, it will call the loss function only, it will never re-render the profit calculator. Okay, it will not recalculate. So basically this anti-pattern is nothing but this is just similar to this anti-pattern 2. Okay, uh, anti-pattern 2 and anti-pattern 4 are quite a similar, but only difference is that this is at the component level. Okay, and this is at the logic level, like if you are writing any function to do active calculation on the fly. So both are a kind of similar pattern, but uses are completely different. So here we are using memo, here we are using use memo. Both are given out of the box in React for function based. For class based, you have to use component should update here, or component should update or pure component. And in this case, you have to use external libraries like memo is one to handle it out.
So
Okay.
Shubhendu, let me just reiterate. So what you are trying to say here is, if you have to do some dynamic calculation based on function and the input of that function, we have to return something
Yes.
as a result, right? You have to render the result
Yes.
in the UI, and we have these kind
Yes.
of multiple function in our render function called from our render function. So instead of when one render function is getting called, the other will also get called because it is re-rendering the whole UI, right? So
Yes. So ideally, there can be two ways. Like for example, like whenever suppose let's say we are calculating profit, how we are calculating by whenever we are entering entering the profit amount and pressing the calculate button. So one way is like whenever we pressing the calculate button, we will write a function and whatever the result we get, we are storing it somewhere else and then showing it. That is also a kind of anti-pattern that we are going to talk in the next one. What here we are doing is that we are calculating everything on the fly. Means whenever the component is rendering, we are simply calculating it.
mm,
So only in this case is also valid in the class-based component, where inside render if we are doing any calculation on the fly. Means basically whenever the component will re-render, it has to calculate, it has to run. But there is a catch. When we use a use memo, it will calculate only when the input parameter has changed. When we are not using use memo, it will run every time the component gets re-rendered. So this is the what problem being solved over here. So even if we write this way, it was not going to see any visual difference in the screen, but it is a very here I have calculated using a very small function, but your calculation can be really large enough and can be time taking also. So unless input parameter is changing, there is no reason of recalculating the entire thing again and again. Yeah. So the next point that we are going to cover is the space complexity. Okay. So this is actually space complexity is not there is no such thing like we can uh, basically like in react js, this is a view library. Okay. So in view library case, it doesn't give out of the box lot of option to store our data and then use it to visualize on the screen. For example, the AngularJS has its root scope and the global scope where we can store. But here in React case, we have just a state given by the React out of the box for every other thing, and also context. But apart from that, there is another option that we have is Redux. Okay, so basically, if I go in this way, we have three storage mechanism. One is Redux, one is context, and another is state. Okay, so now the main problem arises when the developer get confused where to store the data and how to use the data. Okay, so basically where these things has to be used for in case of Redux. Suppose we want to access data across the app. Okay, so you are storing it one component, you are using it in some other component. At that position, we have to use the Redux state. For example, login screen. Whenever you are login, you are getting a token. Okay, you want to use it uh, across the application. Okay, so ideally people put it in local storage or they keep it in the Redux state. Okay, for and the but there is a demerit if you store it in Redux, because whenever you refresh the page, it might get away with that. But the main point what I want to say is that whenever you want to keep it in one place and use it in multiple component across the component like independent component, then you should go for Redux. The context should be used across child only. Like suppose you have a parent component and you have children inside that parent. You have another children inside the first children. You have third children inside the second children, and you want to take the data from parent to the third children. Okay, in that case you can introduce the context in the parent itself and directly access the data in the third child itself. Okay, you don't have to take one by one as a props down drill down through one by one children. Okay, so here we can use the context and the state. If any data has to be used within the component itself, then just store it within that state. Okay, so this is how we should be handling the data. But actually what happen is that with different options, developer used to tends to confuse and they store it at a arbitrary place. So let's go to the uses first. Let me demonstrate you how the this affecting the space complexity, like how we are storing it in the wrong place and because of which the space getting consumed is getting more. Okay, then we can take
So,
further.
Bindu, I have one question here.
Um,
So, what you said
yes,
about context is when you want to pass data to a deep level child, right? Maybe at third level or fourth level, we
yes,
should use context, right?
yes,
And we should use Redux only when we have to pass data across the app, across independent components, right?
yes.
But if we use Redux also to pass data to the deepest level, right? The user context,
Yeah, that is also
is there
fine.
any problem with that?
But only no, no, there is no problem with that. If we use the means instead of context, if we want to use Redux, there is no problem with that. Only thing is that whenever we want to access Redux, now we have function-based component in which we can simply access the Redux and try to put it in. But in case of class-based component, we have to introduce a container in which we have to use the connect function of the Redux. Then we have to build another file, and which will act as a wrapper for HOC wrapper for our component for our third children. we have to build that file, then only we can access the Redux. We cannot access the Redux directly. This Redux is easily accessible in the function based component, but in case of class based component, we have to do little bit tweak in the our code. Means every children has to be that connect function, which will make it as an HOC.
So what you are trying to
So
say is
otherwise we
context
can
is
use it.
easy way to use pass data
Easy way.
in deepest
Yeah.
level, like when there is a nested level of childrens. But we can still use Redux. But
Yes.
when you use Redux, it will be like more
Yes.
code we have to write. We have to create more file. That's the only thing.
More code we have to write, and yeah, but actually this problem is also getting solved in the latest version of the React when we use the function based. In function based we can directly import the Redux and start using it. So here what we are doing is that we are getting the users from the server, okay, and whatever we are making an API call from the server, we are getting the list of user, and whatever we are getting, we are storing it in the Redux state. Okay, that is the problem statement that right now we are seeing. Okay, so I clicked on the get user, and whatever the result we got, we stored it in the Redux state. Right now what happened is that we have two component. Okay, both the component are using the same Redux state, and they used to display the data. Till now our goal is successful because we stored it in the Redux, and both the independent component are using the same data and displaying the data. So far so good. Now let's say we move to our next problem statement. Let's say I say I want to add some name into the component A, but I don't want to, I want that component data to be present in component B. Okay, so whatever I add it in A, it will stay in A, and whatever I add in B, it will stay it in B only, right? So this is what my next problem statement. Okay, so in this case usually the anti pattern that I observed in the code mostly is that people what they do is that they introduce a state. Okay, I will call it as a use state data. So right now what they did was like on API call, whatever Redux is they are receiving, they are then storing the same thing in the state itself. Okay, and state itself, and from the state, from the user data A, they are displaying this thing. Okay, so whenever user will add one more name inside this, okay, so what will happen is that name got added, and what they did was that they push the data into the state, and in this way they keep the both the component means work in a isolated depending upon this Redux state. Okay, so Redux state is still the same old one. Okay, since we have to modify the data in the component A itself, so we have stored in the state, and then we are using it. Now the main problem over here is that if you observed, whenever the first time we make the API call, once the data comes as a props after getting stored in the Redux, the component will re-render once. Then we will cache that props change in component did update, or in our use effect, and try to store the same data in the state. So once we stored it in the state, the component is going to re-render once again. Okay, that is one thing. Means where earlier we are just getting one data and the component is rendering and showing it, now the rendering has surpassed into two times. The second thing is that here we are storing one set of data, we are storing another set of data over here, and this the thing that we are storing it in the state has exactly the same state data what our Redux state has, plus what we have added. So basically there is a duplication of data. If you see from this to this, from red to Karen, there is a duplicate data, right? So this way we have solved our problem, but this is not an ideal way of solving. Okay, so this is also an anti-pattern. Now coming to the component B. Okay, so in component B we have user data B, but we are not, this is not a means basically this is here also we are using one more state, user data B, And this combined data B is a memoized constant. If we have learned from the anti-pattern 4 that we can use memo to get our combined data and all, and it will change only when we will change our parameter. So in this case, whenever this redux will whenever the API will get called and the data will come and store in the redux, the component B will render once. That is fine, and it will calculate on the fly this combined data and it will show it. That is also fine. Now what will happen if we add one more name? If you see our user data B, which is a state, okay, state has just one change, okay. So in this case, the rendering is also once when the actual data comes in. So rendering is one, and the state data doesn't have the duplicate data as we have seen in the component A from here to here, okay. So we don't have any duplicate data, and this data what we are calculating, okay. So this is whenever we are calculating this and storing it in the combined data, since it is a memoized constant, the React will not re-render it once again, just like here React has re-rendered, okay. So the same thing has been achieved, okay, and this is not an anti-pattern, okay. So the flow what we see in the component A side is the anti-pattern flow, and what we see on the B side is not an anti-pattern flow. uh, this is what. So if we primarily overall, if I say the component A rendered twice, so basically the rendering is multiple time. If I say for the component B, the rendering is not rendering is once only, and also there is no duplicate data which is present in the first component, this to this. So this is the like re-rendering means the performance loss by the redux, and this is the space complexity that we are talking about, like creating a duplicate set of data of the same data that we are using. Right now you will see this is a small data, so it doesn't have any impact, but when we are storing a large amount of data, it's going to affect your performance also.
We have one suggestion in
So
the
yeah,
comments that if we start using this use selector, this problem will not come. Is that the case?
use selector, but use selector is used to access the redux state, but whenever you change the data, how where you are gonna store it, means basically you are saying you will change the redux state directly.
But if we talk about right in this anti-pattern 5, so what you have suggested is the right use of each type of uh, state choice that we have. Plus,
Yes,
when we have
means different type of memory, means practically we can have lot of option, like we can put in everything in redux and show it, we can put everything in the state, we can show it, like that. But how to optimizely write the code, that is what I am trying to say. Like in most of the case, like even another use case is that that usually I have not demonstrated it over here, but the use case is like that. Suppose we have to make an API call and show the data in the component itself. I have seen like people are using the API call and storing the same data in the Redux, even if they are using in only one component. That is how they have designed the API flow using Axios and middlewares. So that is also one wrong pattern. Suppose we have to show it in only one component, then we should ideally store it in state and so use it. Once we exit the component, the state will automatically clear from the memory. But if we store it in the Redux, it will persist all the time. So for that also you have to write another piece of code, like while unmounting we should another fire another action which will trigger another redux operation and clear the data. So here the developer has to be precise where he want to use the data and how to use the data. uh, Otherwise this also going to be an anti-pattern.
it again depend on the use case. So so from what I learned from all these anti-pattern that you are saying, right? So we should be
Yes.
clear on what is our use case, and based on the
Yes.
use case,
And what is the best
yeah, and
efficient
based on the
way
use
to
case,
use?
what is the best option that we have? And you have already talked about different
Yes.
options that user can choose from, right?
Choose from, yeah. Yes, sir. Meanwhile, let me tell everyone this whatever we have demonstrated right now, you can get this entire thing from the link itself that I've attached. So the website that I have used for demo has been hosted over here, and the repo that I'm showing, where I have coded all this entire thing and showing it to you. will be available in this GitHub link repo, and the PPT itself you can find it over here. Okay, so you can access it, and in case of any doubt, you can feel free to connect with my and reach out to me.
Okay, I think there is no other question,
So
Shubhendu.
any question?
It was a great presentation and great
Yes, sir.
effort from your side can be seen in the you have prepared a whole app, right? So really good to see that,
Yes, sir.
and thanks for the talk. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yes, sir. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.